Hello and welcome, dear viewers, to our little corner of Baker Street, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee on the coldest of nights. Pull your armchair closer to the fire, for tonight the snow lies thick upon London and death walks abroad in spotless white. Chapter 1. The Woman in White. It was the third week of January 1895, and London had become a city entombed in white. The snow had begun to fall on the evening of the 14th, soft and almost apologetic at first, as though the heavens themselves were reluctant to burden the greatest metropolis on earth with such unrelenting fury. But by dawn the following morning the flakes had thickened into a relentless swirling veil that blotted out the sun and turned day into a perpetual twilight. The Thames lay silent beneath a lid of ice. Barges were locked fast at their moorings, and even the gulls had forsaken the river for the relative shelter of the parks. Hansom cabs moved at a walking pace, their drivers muffled to the eyes, while the few pedestrians who ventured abroad left trails like wounded animals in the virgin drifts. I had spent the afternoon at my club in a vain attempt to escape the claustrophobia of the weather. The streets were all but impassable, and the journey home to Baker Street, which on an ordinary day would have taken 20 minutes, had consumed nearly 2 hours. By the time I climbed the 17 steps to our familiar sitting room, my boots were caked with snow, my mustache was stiff with rime, and I felt as though I had trudged through the Arctic wastes rather than the heart of the British Empire. Sherlock Holmes was standing at the bow window, his lean silhouette framed against the whirling whiteness beyond the glass. He had not troubled to light the gas. The only illumination came from the sullen glow of the coal fire and the occasional flare of a passing street lamp that penetrated the storm. His violin was tucked beneath his chin, and he was drawing from it a slow, mournful adagio. Something of his own composition, I fancied, for I did not recognize the melody. It was a sound to make the heart ache, minor chords that seemed to echo the very breath of the frozen city outside. I shook the snow from my ulster and moved to warm my hands at the hearth. "A singularly depressing evening, Holmes," I remarked. He did not turn. "On the contrary, Watson, it is an evening of the rarest promise. Observe the street below, empty save for one set of footprints approaching our door. Small, elegant, yet spaced with the haste of desperation. A woman's tread, and one who has walked some considerable distance through the storm. Unless I am very much mistaken, we are about to receive a visitor who brings with her a problem worthy of our attention." I joined him at the window. Through the eddying flakes I could indeed discern a slight figure laboring toward our doorstep, cloaked and hooded in white, almost invisible against the snow, but for the occasional gleam of a gas lamp upon wet fur. "Upon my word, Holmes," I said, "your eyes are sharper than mine. I can scarcely make out the lamppost across the road." He laid the violin gently in its case. "The lamppost is irrelevant. It is the negative evidence that speaks, the absence of other footprints in the fresh fall of the last hour. Our visitor is alone and has come on foot, and has chosen to come directly here rather than seek assistance closer to hand. Ergo, the matter is both urgent and of a nature that ordinary channels have failed to satisfy her." Before I could reply, there came the familiar double knock upon the street door, followed by Mrs. Hudson's measured tread upon the stairs. She entered carrying a card upon a salver. "A lady to see you, Mr. Holmes. She would give no name, but said the matter was of life and death." Holmes took the card. It was blank. "Show her up at once, Mrs. Hudson, and perhaps a decanter of the '83 brandy. Our visitor will be half frozen." Mrs. Hudson withdrew, and a moment later the door opened again to admit the stranger. She was tall, taller than most women, with a carriage that spoke of breeding and command even through her exhaustion. Her cloak was of finest white Russian sable, now sodden and heavy with melted snow, and beneath its hood her face was deathly pale, framed by hair of lustrous black that had escaped its pins and damp tendrils. Her eyes were a striking violet, wide with terror and grief, and in her gloved hands she clutched a single white camellia, its petals bruised and crushed as though she had gripped it throughout her long journey through the storm. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" Her voice was low and musical, but it trembled upon the edge of breaking. "I am he. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson. Pray come to the fire, you are perishing with cold." She allowed me to take her cloak, revealing a gown of dove-gray silk that had once been exquisite but was now dark with wet at the hem. I noticed that her boots were finely made yet soaked through, and that she limped slightly upon the left foot, evidence of a blister earned during her desperate pilgrimage. Holmes waited until she was seated and had taken a sip of the brandy I pressed upon her before speaking again. "You have walked here from Belgrave Square, I fancy?" She started violently, the color that the brandy had restored to her cheeks draining away once more. "How could you possibly—" "A trifle. The snow upon your hem bears the distinctive grit of the newly laid gravel in the square. Belgrave, not Eton or Grosvenor, for the stones there are of a darker hue. Your boots are from Lob of St. James's, and the left one shows the wear of a lady who habitually descends from a carriage upon the near side. Thus the blister, for you have walked farther tonight than in many months. But pray continue. You were about to tell me of your husband." Her lips parted in astonishment. "Sir Reginald Harrowby," she whispered. He was found dead this morning." Holmes leaned forward, his long hands clasped before him. "In the conservatory of your house in Belgrave Square, the doors bolted from within, the windows fastened, the glass roof unbroken and covered with 6 inches of undisturbed snow. Yet Sir Reginald lay in the center of the tessellated floor with a contortion of agony upon his features, and upon his patent leather evening shoes there was fresh snow, as though he had but newly come in from the storm. In his rigid fingers he clutched a white camellia, similar to the one you yourself carry, and from the crushed petals there arises, even now, the faint but unmistakable odor of bitter almonds." The lady stared at him as though he were the very spirit of prophecy. The camellia slipped from her fingers and fell to the hearthrug. "You know already," she breathed. "Then you know that the police can make nothing of it. Inspector Lestrade speaks of suicide, but Reginald would never, and even if he would, how could he? There was no glass, no phial, nothing from which he might have taken the poison. The conservatory was locked from the inside. He always locked it when he went to tend his orchids after dinner. The servants heard the bolt shoot at 10:30. At 11, when his secretary, Mr. Slater, went to remind him of an early appointment, the door was still bolted. They broke it down and found him. Found him. Her voice broke entirely. I refilled her glass and she drank gratefully. Holmes's eyes had taken on that peculiar inward look which told me his brain was racing. "The flower," he said gently. "You called it the flower of death in your family." She nodded, the tears beginning to fall now that the worst had been spoken. "It is an old Harrowby legend. My husband laughed at it. He was a man of science, a patron of the Royal Society, but his grandfather died clutching just such a bloom, and his great-uncle before him. 3 times the white camellia has appeared in our family, and 3 times death has followed within the day. Reginald received the first this morning by post. No card, no message, only the flower in a box lined with snow. He thought it a poor jest, and now he is gone, and I am left with this." She indicated the crushed bloom upon the rug. Holmes picked it up with exquisite care, using his pocket lens to examine the broken stem. "Hothouse grown," he murmured, "and forced early. Note the unnatural thickness of the petals. The box lined with snow is interesting. Someone wished to preserve the flower at the precise moment of cutting. and the scent of prussic acid is quite distinct. Sheila's acid, I fancy, rather than the pure anhydrous. There is a trace of greenish discoloration where the liquid has soaked through. He laid the camellia upon the table and fixed the lady with his keen gaze. Lady Harrowby, forgive me, I deduce your marriage from the ring upon your finger and the mourning band you wear beneath your glove. There is more that you have not told me. You fear that this is no isolated tragedy. You believe the curse of the white camellia has returned and that you yourself or others of your household may be next. She rose suddenly, swaying upon her feet. How can you know my very thoughts? Yes, yes, it is true. Reginald dismissed the legend, but I never could. And now I feel that death walks the snow outside my house waiting. Mr. Holmes, I have no one else to turn to. Scotland Yard think me hysterical. They speak of locking me up for my own protection. But I know that the danger is real, and that the conservatory was no sanctuary, and that the snow itself has become my enemy. Will you come? Will you come to Belgrave Square before the next camellia blooms? Sherlock Holmes stood, and in the firelight his aquiline features seemed carved from granite. My dear Lady Harrowby, he said, nothing could keep me away. The game, as my friend Watson will tell you, is afoot, and it promises to be a singularly sinister one. Watson, your revolver, I think, and the bull's-eye lantern. We shall require both before this night is out. Outside, the snow continued to fall in great silent flakes, covering the footprints of the woman in white as though she had never passed that way at all. But in our sitting room at 221B Baker Street, the fire burned bright, and for the first time in days I felt the blood course warm in my veins. Another drama was beginning, another dance with death in the great cold heart of London. And somewhere in the swirling darkness, the white camellia waited to bloom again. Chapter 2. Footprints in the Snow. The storm had not abated by the time we quit Baker Street. If anything, it had worsened. The wind howled along the thoroughfares like a living thing, whipping the snow into blinding eddies that stung the face and found their way into every crevice of one's clothing. No hansom cab could have navigated the drifts that night, so Holmes had sent an urgent message ahead, and a sleigh awaited us at the corner. Borrowed, I believe, from the stables of the Russian embassy, for its runners were of Siberian pattern and the driver a bearded moujik muffled in furs. Lady Harrowby sat opposite us, her white cloak drawn close, the crushed camellia still clutched in her lap like a talisman. Holmes was silent, his eyes half closed, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. I occupied myself with watching the city glide past in ghostly fashion. The great houses of Mayfair looming like ice-bound ships, the occasional constable a dark speck against the universal white, his bull's-eye lantern swinging like a will-o'-the-wisp. We reached Belgrave Square at last, the sleigh hissing to a halt before a mansion that seemed carved from a single block of snow. Every window blazed with light, yet the effect was not cheerful. Rather, it gave the house the appearance of a lantern carried through a churchyard. A knot of constables stamped their feet upon the steps, their breath pluming in the frigid air. Among them stood Inspector Lestrade, small, lean, and ferret-like, his rat-trap mouth set in its customary expression of professional resentment. "Mr. Holmes," he said, touching his hat with grudgingly, "I might have known Lady Harrowby would send for you. Though what you can make of this devilry that we cannot, I'm sure I don't know." Holmes sprang down lightly. "The impossible always interests me, Lestrade. Lead on." The hall was oppressively warm after the bitter night outside. Liveried footmen stood about like statues, their faces pale and frightened. We were conducted through corridors lined with ancestral portraits, stern Harrowbys in periwigs and armor, all seeming to glare down at us in disapproval. until we reached the conservatory at the rear of the house. It was a magnificent structure, a great glass cathedral added only 10 years earlier at enormous expense. Palms and ferns rose in luxuriant profusion toward the vaulted roof, and the air was heavy with the scent of orchids and damp earth. Hot water pipes hissed gently along the walls, maintaining a tropical warmth that made my overcoat unbearable. In the center of the tessellated marble floor lay the body. Sir Reginald Harrowby had been a big man in life, broad-shouldered, florid, with the look of one who enjoyed the pleasures of the table. In death he was hideous. His face was congested to a deep purple. The tongue protruded, the eyes bulged in their sockets. His evening dress was immaculate save for one detail. Upon his patent leather pumps there clung patches of fresh snow, already beginning to melt into dark spots upon the marble. One gloved hand was outstretched toward the single door as though in final appeal. In the rigid fingers of the other was clasped a white camellia, its petals stained faintly blue at the heart. Holmes was upon his knees in an instant, his magnifying lens flashing in the gaslight. "Note the posture, Watson," he murmured. "The body lies 12 feet from the door, 14 from the nearest window. Rigor is well advanced. Death occurred at least 8 hours ago. Yet the snow upon the shoes is fresh, the crystals still sharp and distinct. Curious." He crept forward on all fours, examining every inch of the floor. No disturbance of the gravel paths, no trace whatever of a rope or ladder from the glass roof. And observe, Lestrade, the snow up there lies smooth and unbroken to a depth of 6 inches. The door was bolted on the inside. The key remains in the lock. The windows are fastened with patent catches that can only be operated from within. The ventilation panes at the apex are too narrow even for a child. Lestrade gave his characteristic sniff. "Suicide, Mr. Holmes. The man took prussic acid. There's the stain at the corners of the mouth, and the smell is plain. Enough. He was alone, locked the door as was his habit, and did the deed among his precious flowers. The snow on the shoes? He must have walked in it earlier, and it hadn't melted in the warmth here." Holmes rose, brushing a little soil from his knees. "Your explanation has the merit of simplicity, Lestrade. Unfortunately, it is nonsense. The snow upon patent leather in a room kept at 75 degrees would have melted within minutes. This is fresh fallen within the hour. Moreover, there is no vessel, no glass, no phial, nothing from which the poison could have been taken. You searched thoroughly?" "Every pot, every palm, every square inch," Lestrade said sullenly. Lady Harrowby had remained near the doorway, one hand pressed to her lips. Now she gave a little cry. Holmes had drawn something from beneath a large Kentia palm. A single white kid glove soaked through, the delicate fingers dark with moisture. "This is yours, I fancy, madam." She came forward, trembling. "Yes, I lost it yesterday in the garden. I thought it had blown away." The scent of bitter almonds rose faintly but unmistakably from the damp leather. Lestrade pounced. "There you have it, her ladyship's glove soaked in the poison. She came in through the door before it was locked, administered the dose, then somehow slipped out again, leaving the bolt shot behind her." "Women are clever at that sort of thing." Lady Harrowby recoiled as though struck. "You cannot think—" Holmes held up a restraining hand. "Peace, Lestrade. The glove is for the left hand. Lady Harrowby wears her wedding ring upon the left. Observe how the kid is stretched by it. This glove is unmarked. It belonged to someone who wore no such ring." He turned to the widow. "Tell me, madam, was your husband expecting any visitor last night?" "None." "He dined alone. Mr. Slater, his secretary, had gone to his club. Reginald spent the evening with his orchids. It was his custom every night after port." "And the camellia he holds, did he receive it by post this morning?" "Yes, in a plain box lined with snow to keep it fresh. No card." Holmes's eyes gleamed. Interesting. Someone went to considerable trouble. Lestrade, have you examined the roof? We sent man up with a ladder. Snow's undisturbed right across. Holmes suddenly dropped to the floor again, his nose inches from the marble. Ah, here we have it. The first true clue. He indicated a faint circular discoloration upon one of the tesserae, no larger than a florin. Frozen prussic acid, Watson. Very dilute, poured upon the hot water pipe that runs beneath this very spot. The heat vaporizes it slowly, invisibly. Sir Reginald enters at his usual time, locks the door behind him for privacy, inhales the fumes over the course of 20 minutes. Staggers. Falls exactly here. The snow upon his shoes is in reality frost, formed when the cold air from his final gasping breath met. The poison met the moisture upon the warm floor. He rose triumphantly. The glove was used by the murderer to handle the frozen block without leaving prints or absorbing the poison through the skin. Our killer is clever, Watson. Very clever indeed, but not quite clever enough. Lady Harrowby swayed and would have fallen had I not caught her arm. Then my husband was murdered, she whispered. Unquestionably, said Holmes. And the white camellia is the signature. The game, my dear Lady Harrowby, has only just begun. Outside, the wind rattled the glass panes like impatient fingers, and somewhere in the great frozen city, death was already choosing its next blossom. Chapter 3. The Frozen Corpse. We returned to Baker Street as the clocks were striking 2, the sleigh cutting a fresh path through the ever-deepening snow. The city had surrendered utterly to the storm. Even the nocturnal scavengers and the night cabs had sought shelter, and our runners hissed along in unbroken silence. Lady Harrowby had remained at Belgrave Square under the care of her physician and a police nurse. Lestrade, whatever his faults, was not entirely without compassion. Holmes had promised to call again at first light, but I could see that his mind was already far ahead, racing through possibilities with that relentless energy which characterized his most intense moods. Mrs. Hudson, bless her, had kept the fire banked high. A cold supper awaited us, game pie, a wedge of Stilton, and a bottle of Bone, but Holmes waved it away untouched. He flung off his ulster, seized a large sheet of foolscap from the clutter upon the table, and began sketching with rapid, precise strokes. I recognized the ground plan of the conservatory emerging beneath his pencil. The tessellated floor, the positions of the palms, the hot water pipes indicated by dotted lines, the exact spot where Sir Reginald's body had lain marked with a small cross. I poured myself a whiskey and soda and settled into my old armchair. Well, Holmes, I said at length, this business has all the hallmarks of a cause célèbre. A locked room, poison without a vessel, snow upon the shoes in a hothouse. What do you make of it? He did not look up. I make of it, Watson, that we stand at the threshold of a singularly audacious and cold-blooded design. Let us enumerate the facts, for in them and them alone lies the solution will be found. He pinned the plan to the mantel with a jackknife and began pacing, ticking off points upon his long fingers. Fact 1. Sir Reginald Harrowby died of hydrocyanic acid poisoning. Prussic acid in its vapor form, I suspect, for the quantity required in liquid would have left traces we did not find. Fact 2. He died in a room bolted from within, with no orifice large enough for human ingress save the door he himself had locked. Fact 3. Fresh snow, or what appeared to be snow, was upon his shoes, yet the room was maintained at a temperature that would have melted any ordinary snow within minutes. Fact 4. A white kid glove, soaked in the poison, was concealed beneath a palm. It belonged to a woman, but not to Lady Harrowby. Fact 5. The camellia, hothouse forced, delivered in snow, carrying the same odor of bitter almonds, a signature and linked to an old family legend of death. Fact 6, and most vital, There is no vessel, no glass, no cup, no phial, no syringe. The police turned the place inside out. Nothing. He paused before the fire, his hawk-like profile thrown into sharp relief by the flames. Therefore, he continued, the poison was not ingested. It was inhaled. The snow upon the shoes is in truth hoarfrost, condensed from the moisture in the air when the cold poison vapor met the warm floor. The glove was used to position a frozen block of the dilute acid upon or near the hot pipe, where it vaporized slowly, invisibly, lethally. Sir Reginald, admiring his orchids, breathed his death over the course of half an hour. I set down my glass. But who, Holmes? Who could gain access to the heating system unobserved? And the camellia? Why the theatrical flourish? He smiled thinly. As to the who, we have several candidates. Lady Harrowby herself, though her grief appeared genuine and the glove does not fit her hand. The secretary, Slater, who was absent at his club yet might have returned. The servants, any one of them might bear a grudge, or an outsider who studied the house's routines. As to the camellia, it is the signature of a mind that delights in drama, in terror. Someone who wishes the Harrowbys to believe the old curse has awakened. He took up his pipe and began filling it with the rank latakia that made our sitting room notorious among landladies. There is more, Watson. The choice of prussic acid is significant. It is swift, yes, but also esoteric. One does not purchase it at the corner chemist for a headache. It suggests scientific knowledge, perhaps a chemist, a doctor, or an amateur of toxicology. Sir Reginald himself patronized the Royal Society. His circle would include such persons. I leaned forward. You think the motive lies in that direction, some professional rivalry? Possible. Or something older, deeper. The legend of the camellia. 3 previous deaths, you say. We must investigate those, but tomorrow. Tonight I must think. He sank into his chair, wreathed himself in clouds of tobacco, and stared into the fire. The storm howled about the eaves. Occasionally a gust rattled the window panes like thrown gravel. I picked up the evening paper, but the printed words danced meaninglessly before my mind was back in that steamy glass tomb with the purple-faced corpse among the orchids. At length I could bear the silence no longer. Holmes, I said, if your theory is correct, then the murderer must have entered the conservatory before Sir Reginald, placed the frozen poison, and withdrawn, without being seen. But how? The door was watched by the footman after dinner, and the bolt was shot from within. Holmes's eyes gleamed beneath half-closed lids. Exactly, Watson. The murderer did not enter before Sir Reginald. The device was placed earlier, perhaps days earlier, and triggered by the heat or clockwork or chemistry. Or, and this is the more terrifying possibility, the vapor was introduced after death, to create the illusion of impossibility. But no, that will not serve. The frost is genuine. He sprang up suddenly and crossed to his chemical table where bottles and retorts stood in orderly confusion. Consider. Prussic acid freezes at -14 degrees Celsius. Last night the temperature fell to -18. A block of the poison, properly diluted, could be carried in an insulated container, placed upon the pipe, and left to melt and vaporize at leisure. The glove protected the murderer's hand from frostbite as much as from the poison. He held a test tube to the lamp, watching the lamplight play through the colorless liquid. But the supreme audacity lies in the snow. Our killer used the very weather as an accomplice. London itself became the locked room. A cold draft seemed to pass through the room despite the fire. I pulled my dressing gown closer. Then we are dealing with a mind almost the equal of your own, I said quietly. Holmes's face darkened. Do not say that, Watson. There is only one mind, I fear, in that degree, and he lies at the bottom of Reichenbach. But this has something of his cold brilliance. The theatricality, the needless elaboration, all calculated to inspire terror. He resumed his pacing until the pipe went out, then flung himself upon the sofa with a sigh. Sleep, Watson. Tomorrow we return to Belgrave Square. I must examine the heating system itself and the past deaths of the camellia, for I very much fear that Sir Reginald is only the first petal to fall. I retired to my room, but sleep came hard. The wind moaned in the chimney like a dying man, and in my dreams I wandered endlessly through glass corridors where white flowers bloomed with eyes of poison, and footsteps behind me left no prints in the snow. When I woke, the storm still raged, and the new day felt heavier than the night that had borne it. Chapter 4. 3 telegrams and a broken alibi. The morning brought no relief from the storm. If anything, the snow fell thicker than ever, piling in great drifts against the area railings and turning Baker Street into a narrow white canyon. The milkman had not come, nor the postman in his usual course. Only the telegraph boys, those indomitable red-jacketed imps, still battled their way through the tempest with their urgent missives. I came down a little after 9 to find Holmes already dressed and breakfasting upon coffee and toast. He looked as though he had not slept at all. His eyes were bright and feverish, his movements quick and bird-like. The foolscap plan of the conservatory still lay upon the table, now covered with cryptic annotations in his neat, crabbed hand. "Any fresh developments?" I asked, helping myself to eggs and bacon. "Several," he replied, pushing a stack of telegrams toward me. "These arrived within the last hour." The first was from Lestrade, in his official brevity unmistakable. Lady Harrowby's maid interrogated. Stop swears mistress absent from bedroom 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Stop servants heard nothing. Stop no footprints leading from house. Stop Lady Harrowby claims she walked in sleep. Stop physician confirms history of somnambulism. Stop still puzzling. The second bore the unmistakable stamp of the Diogenes Club. Sir Reginald dined here last evening. Stop left alone at 10:45. Stop appeared preoccupied. Stop mentioned expecting important letter. Stop no more. Mycroft. The third was delivered by a shivering boy who refused to wait for a reply and vanished immediately into the snow. It was unsigned, written in elegant copperplate upon heavy cream paper. The second camellia blooms tonight. Holmes's face was grim as he folded the paper with deliberate care. The game escalates, Watson. Our murderer grows bold. The first telegram suggests Lady Harrowby may have left the house unobserved, perhaps to place the frozen poison earlier in the day. The second confirms Sir Reginald was alone after leaving the club, ruling out any quarrel there. But this third, he tapped the anonymous message. This is a direct challenge. The killer taunts us. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Then Lady Harrowby is in danger. Or she is the danger, Holmes said quietly. Come, we return to Belgrave Square at once. The sleigh was still available, and we reached the mansion by 11. The scene inside was one of barely contained panic. Servants whispered in knots. The butler's hands trembled as he took our coats. Lestrade met us in the hall, his sharp features pinched with cold and suspicion. You'll want to see her ladyship, he said without preamble. She's in the morning room, claims she remembers nothing of last night after taking her sleeping draught. The maid found her bed empty at midnight, made up as though never slept in. Found her ladyship herself at dawn, wandering in the garden in her nightdress, half frozen, clutching another white camellia. Physician says it's genuine somnambulism. She's done it before, but conveniently, eh? Lady Harrowby sat by the fire in the morning room, wrapped in blankets, her violet eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. Upon the table before her lay the second camellia, its heart stained crimson as though dipped in blood. I swear to you, Mr. Holmes, she whispered as we entered, I remember nothing. I retired at 10. I took my laudanum as always. the shock of Reginald's death. I woke in the snow with this in my hand. The gardeners found me at first light. Holmes examined the flower with his lens. Identical to the first, same hothouse forcing, same trace of prussic acid. Delivered how? Pushed under the morning room door sometime in the night, Lestrade said. No footprints approaching the house, nothing. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Then our murderer either resides within these walls or possesses a means of entry and exit that defies the snow itself. We were interrupted by a sudden commotion in the hall. A cry, running feet, the crash of a drop tray. We hurried out to find the footmen clustered about the library window, which stood wide open despite the cold. Snow had drifted across the carpet in a perfect white fan. Upon the terrace below lay a body. It was Felix Slater, Sir Reginald's secretary, a thin, nervous young man of perhaps 30 with sandy hair and pince-nez. He lay on his back in the snow, limbs flung wide, face contorted in the same dreadful rictus we had seen upon his employer. His evening clothes were dusted with snow, but his shoes were dry. In his gloved right hand he clutched a third white camellia. Lestrade swore under his breath. Another one. Same poison, I'll warrant. Holmes was already at the window examining the sill. He fell, or was pushed from here. See the scuff marks upon the carpet, the disturbance of the snow upon the terrace directly below. Yet observe the footprints. He pointed to the garden beyond. A single line of footprints led from the terrace to the body, deep, hurried impressions, the tread of a man's boot. But 10 yards from the house they ceased altogether, vanishing as though the maker had been lifted bodily into the air. The snow beyond was smooth and untouched to a depth of 18 inches. Impossible, breathed Lestrade. Precisely, said Holmes, and for the first time I heard something almost like excitement in his voice. Watson, the tape measure, quickly. He dropped from the window into the drift below, measuring the strides with scientific care. The prints were fresh, made within the hour, the edges still sharp. The final print showed the heel dug deep as though the walker had launched himself upward. Yet there was no tree, no wall, nothing from which a rope might have been slung. The library is on the first floor. The drop is 12 feet. Slater was working late, Lestrade said, consulting his notebook. Butler saw him enter the library at 10:30 last night with papers from Sir Reginald's desk. Said he'd finish cataloging them. Window was closed then, locked, he thinks. No one heard a thing until the gardener found the body at dawn. Holmes stood in the snow, turning slowly, his gaze sweeping the blank white expanse. 3 deaths threatened by the camellia, he murmured. 2 already accomplished. The third will be Lady Harrowby herself unless we act swiftly. But how? The house is watched, the grounds patrolled. And these footprints that walk upon air? He climbed back through the window, brushing snow from his coat. Lestrade, have the body removed for autopsy. I want confirmation of prussic acid and the exact time of death. Watson, we must examine Slater's papers. Somewhere in this house lies the thread that connects these horrors. But even as we turned toward the library, I could not shake the feeling that unseen eyes watched us from the swirling snow beyond the glass. That death, having tasted blood twice, now hungered for the third camellia, and that the storm itself was its willing accomplice. The footprints ended, but the trail had only begun. Chapter 5. The house on Belgrave Square. The library smelled of Russia leather, cigar smoke, and fresh snow. Slater's body had been removed, but the open window still breathed winter into the room. Holmes closed and latched it with a sharp click, then stood motionless for a full minute, his eyes traveling over every detail as though photographing it upon his brain. The carpet bore the clear marks of Slater's frantic last moments. A half circle of scuffed pile where his heels had scraped, A single overturned chair, and most curious, a small brass key lying beneath the desk as though dropped in the final convulsion. Holmes pounced upon the key. "Number 147, he read from the tag. Safe deposit, Charing Cross branch. Slater had secrets after all. He crossed to the desk. Papers lay scattered, ledgers, share certificates, a half-finished letter in Slater's neat clerk's hand. Holmes flicked through them with the speed of a bank teller. Sir Reginald was on the verge of financial ruin, he announced. South African mines, speculation gone disastrously wrong. Debts to the tune of £250,000, bankruptcy within the month unless a miracle occurred. He held up a draft will. And here is the miracle, dated 3 days ago. Everything, unentailed estate, the Belgrave Square house, the Yorkshire lands, to his nephew, Lord Arthur Harrowby, on condition that Lady Harrowby receives a life interest in £20,000. The previous will left the bulk to charity and a distant cousin. I gave a low whistle. Motive enough for murder, one would think. Precisely. Yet Lord Arthur was in Paris until yesterday, or so he claims. Holmes's gaze fell upon a small morocco case upon the blotter. Inside lay 3 white camellias, still dewy, wrapped in damp cotton wool. Slater was keeping a stock, I said, or receiving them. Observe the florist's mark, E. Moriarty, Covent Garden, the same as the card found with the first bloom. He slipped 1 flower into an envelope, then turned his attention to the fireplace. A quantity of ash lay in the grate, paper ash, fine and gray. Holmes raked it carefully with the poker and extracted a fragment no larger than a sixpence. Even half burned, the crest was unmistakable. A crowned cipher, A.R., Arthur Rex, Lord Arthur Harrowby. Slater was burning his employer's correspondence last night, Holmes murmured. Blackmail, perhaps? Or covering tracks for a third party? At that moment the door opened and Lord Arthur himself entered. Tall, fair, exquisitely dressed in a fur-lined coat still rimed with snow. He was perhaps 30, with the Harrowby nose and a languid manner that did not quite conceal the calculating glint in his pale eyes. "Mr. Holmes," he said coolly, "my aunt informed me you were here. I have just returned from Paris, arrived at Charing Cross not an hour ago. This second tragedy is appalling." Holmes regarded him steadily. "Your train was delayed by the snow, I presume." "By 12 hours. I have the ticket if you require it." "I shall. Tell me, Lord Arthur, were you aware that you are now master of what remains of the Harrowby fortune?" A flicker crossed the young man's face. Surprise quickly masked. "I was not. My uncle and I were never close. He disapproved of my continental habits." Holmes smiled without warmth. "Yet you stand to inherit everything that is not entailed. A fortunate young man." Lord Arthur's jaw tightened. "If you are suggesting—" "I suggest nothing. I merely observe." Holmes turned away, dismissing him. "We shall speak again, Lord Arthur." When the door closed, Holmes sprang to the window and flung it open. He leaned out, scanning the snow-covered terrace below. "Come, Watson, the footprints." We dropped into the drift and followed the mysterious trail once more. The prints still ended abruptly 10 yards from the house, but now in daylight Holmes noticed what we had missed in the dawn gloom. A faint, almost invisible groove in the snow, running parallel to the footprints and continuing straight toward the garden wall. A groove no wider than a man's thumb. Holmes knelt, brushing snow aside with his glove. "Silk line," he said triumphantly. "Strong fishing silk, waxed to prevent freezing. See how it has cut its channel?" Slater was lured to the window, perhaps by a note, perhaps by a face he recognized. The murderer stood upon the terrace, threw the line with a small weight, hooked it to something inside, possibly the curtain cord, and then walked backward, paying out the line until he reached the point where the footprints cease. There he simply ascended. Ascended? I echoed. Holmes pointed upward. A stout branch of an ancient yew overhung the terrace, its lower limb exactly above the final footprint. He climbed the tree. There are scratches on the bark, walked along the branch, and dropped to the terrace. The line was then used to close the window from outside, or perhaps it was never fully opened until the struggle. The snow upon the sill was disturbed by Slater's own hands as he clutched at it in his death throes. Ingenious, Watson, almost worthy of a better cause. He followed the groove to the wall. There, half buried in a drift, lay a small grapnel of blackened iron, its silk cord still attached. The murderer retrieved his line by walking back along the branch, then cut it free. But he was hurried. Missed this fragment. Holmes coiled the silk carefully into his pocket. So the house can be entered from the garden, I said. Yet the conservatory murder still required access to the heating pipes beneath the floor. Exactly. Someone who knows the house intimately. Someone who can come and go without raising alarm. He stood in thought for a moment, snowflakes settling on his deerstalker. We must examine the basement, Watson, and we must speak to the housekeeper about visitors, particularly lady visitors, in the weeks before Sir Reginald's death. The housekeeper, a formidable Scotswoman named Mrs. Macready, received us in her sanctum. Yes, she admitted reluctantly, there had been a lady, tall, veiled, always after dark. Came 3 times in the past month. Sir Reginald received her in the conservatory alone. The last visit was the very day before he died. Always brought flowers, Mrs. Macready said. White camellias from her own hothouse, she said. And always left by the garden door. Holmes's eyes blazed. Her name? She gave none. But Mr. Slater, he let her in the last time, seemed to know her well. We found Lord Arthur in the drawing-room drinking brandy with a hand that trembled slightly. Holmes confronted him without preamble. Your accomplice has a taste for white camellias, Lord Arthur, and for prussic acid. Shall I send for Lestrade, or will you tell us the name of the woman who visited your uncle in the conservatory? The young man's face went the color of putty. I do not. Holmes held up the coil of silk line. Paris, I believe, was something of a fabrication. You never left London. The train ticket was purchased yesterday morning by Mr. Slater using your name. You have been here all along, watching, waiting, arranging. Lord Arthur's glass slipped from his fingers and shattered upon the hearth. It was her idea, he whispered, all of it. She said the camellias would make it look like the old family curse, madness, not murder. She provided the poison. I only let her in. Her name, Holmes thundered. Winter, Lord Arthur said hoarsely. She called herself Miss Winter, but her real name, he swallowed hard. Her real name is Elena. Countess Elena Moriarty. The name struck me like a blow. Holmes stood utterly still, his face a mask of ice. Moriarty, he repeated softly. Of course. The sister. Outside, the snow continued to fall, thick and silent, covering the footprints, the grapnel, the blood, and the sins of Belgrave Square beneath a shroud of perfect white. Chapter 6. The Scent of Bitter Almonds. The name hung in the air like the tolling of a funeral bell. Moriarty. I felt the blood leave my face. Holmes alone seemed carved from granite. Only the faintest tightening about his mouth betrayed the shock that must have surged through him. Lord Arthur Harrowby had collapsed into a chair, his handsome features suddenly boyish and terrified. You know of her? He stammered. I know the family, Holmes answered, his voice dangerously calm. The professor is dead these 4 years, but the blood runs true. There was a younger sister, Elena, believed to have perished in Italy of consumption. Evidently, reports were exaggerated. He rounded upon the young man with sudden ferocity. "Speak, sir. Every detail. When did this woman first approach you?" Lord Arthur swallowed hard. 6 months ago. A letter, perfumed, sealed with black wax. She wrote that she had known my uncle in Naples years before the marriage, that he had wronged her. She claimed to possess letters that would ruin the family name if Aunt Clarissa ever learned of them. She demanded money at first. Then when the mines failed and there was no money, she proposed another arrangement. "Murder," I said flatly. He flinched. She made it sound elegant. The old family curse, the camellias, the locked room, no suspicion could touch us. The estate would be mine, the scandal buried forever. She said the police would see only a tragic legend come to life. She supplied the poison, the method, everything. And Slater discovered us. He had been Uncle's confidant in the Naples affair. When he realized what we planned, he threatened exposure unless he received a share. Elena said he was too dangerous. She sent him the third camellia herself last night. I swear I did not know she meant to kill him until I found the body. Holmes's eyes glittered like steel. "You fool! You have danced with a tarantula. Where is she now?" "I do not know. She always came and went like a ghost. Her rooms were in Bloomsbury, Grafton Street. But she spoke of leaving London once the third death was accomplished." Holmes was already moving. "Lestrade, detain Lord Arthur on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. Watson, my hat and coat." We plunged back into the storm. Covent Garden first. The florist's shop marked E. Moriarty. The market was a white wilderness, barrows abandoned under tarpaulins, only a few hardy costers still shouting their wares through muffled scarves. The shop stood shuttered, its sign half obliterated by snow. Holmes's skeleton keys made short work of the lock. Inside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of hothouse blooms. Row upon row of camellias, white, pink, crimson, glowed like wax under the dim gas jets. At the rear, a door opened into a small laboratory, a spirit lamp, retorts, a rack of stoppered bottles labeled in Latin. One shelf held a dozen small blocks of cloudy ice in silver dishes, frozen prussic acid, slowly sublimating into invisible death. Upon the workbench lay an open diary bound in white vellum. Holmes snatched it up. "They will find this. Let the great Sherlock Holmes read and understand that the Moriarty intellect burns still. The snow falls upon Baker Street as it falls upon Belgrave Square." Impartially, Holmes closed the book with a snap. "She is not finished. Lady Harrowby is marked for tonight." We raced for Bloomsbury. Grafton Street lay under a thick white pall, the houses blind and secretive. Number 27 was a narrow, respectable lodging house. The landlady, when Holmes's card and a sovereign had worked their usual miracle, admitted that Miss Winter, tall, foreign-looking, always veiled, had taken the first-floor front for 3 months. "She's been powerful poorly these 2 days, the woman said. Coughing something dreadful, barely left her room, but this morning she paid her bill and said she was leaving for the continent tonight. Her boxes went an hour ago. We took the stairs 2 at a time. The door was locked." Holmes's shoulder bursted inward. The room was exquisitely neat. A fire burned low. A single camellia floated in a bowl of water upon the table. Upon the hearthrug lay the woman. Countess Elena Moriarty was beautiful even in death. Tall, raven-haired, the bones of her face fine and cruel beneath the pallor. She wore a white silk dressing gown. Her lips were stained faintly blue, her eyes half open, fixed upon some distant horizon. In her right hand she clutched the final white camellia. In her left, a small empty phial. Upon the writing desk lay a letter addressed in the same elegant hand. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, who will doubtless arrive too late. You destroyed my brother. Society called it justice. I call it murder. 3 Harrowbys have paid the first installment of the debt. The snow has been my ally, the camellia my signature. I go now to join Napoleon of crime in whatever circle of hell is reserved for those who dare to think. You will find the method elegant. A frozen pellet concealed in the heart of the last camellia, time to dissolve when the flower was placed in warm water. I have inhaled my own signature. Tell the widow she is safe. Tell Scotland Yard they may close their files. Tell yourself when you stand again at Reichenbach in memory that genius is immortal, and vengeance colder than any English winter. E.M. Holmes stood a long moment in silence. Then he knelt, touched the woman's wrist out of habit, and closed the staring eyes with gentle fingers. She was magnificent, he said at last, almost reluctantly. A mind wasted on revenge. Downstairs, Lestrade's whistle sounded, reinforcements arriving. Holmes slipped the diary and letter into his pocket. Come, Watson, there is still one thread to untie. I thought the case was ended, tragically, completely. I could not have been more wrong. For as we stepped back into the swirling snow, Holmes paused upon the doorstep and looked up at the blind windows of the house opposite. Observe, Watson, he said quietly. Fresh footprints approach this door, but none leave. Someone watched us enter, someone who knew we would come here. He pointed to the virgin snow of the area steps. A single set of prints, small, elegant, a woman's, descended into the darkness below the street. And at the bottom, faint but unmistakable, the impression of a white camellia pressed into the snow like a seal. The Countess was dead, yet the game was not over. Chapter 7, Midnight at the Diogenes Club, the discovery in Grafton Street left me stunned. But Holmes was already moving again, his face set like flint. Watson, the hansom, quickly! We must reach Pall Mall before the hour. It was past 10 o'clock and the streets were all but impassable. Our cab crawled through the drifts, the horse slipping at every step while the wind howled round us like a pack of wolves. Holmes sat forward, gloved hands clenched upon his stick, staring into the storm as though he could force it to yield its secrets. The footprints that did not leave, he said suddenly. They trouble me more than the Countess's corpse. Someone stood in that house opposite for hours, watching her window, watching for us. Someone who knew her plans to the minute. You think she had an accomplice after all? Or a puppet master? The woman we found was brilliant, but she was also dying, consumption in its last stage. The cough the landlady heard was real. The blood-flecked handkerchief I found in her grate was real. A dying woman does not climb yew trees or carry frozen poison through the snow. Someone else performed the physical acts while Elena Moriarty provided the design. At the Diogenes Club, the great doors were locked against the weather, but the porter knew Holmes and admitted us without question. The strangest club in London was almost deserted. Only a few aged members dozed in wing chairs beneath the flickering gas, forbidden by rule to acknowledge one another. Mycroft Holmes alone sat awake in the strangers' room, a single lamp illuminating mountains of official papers and a glass of port as dark as blood. He looked up as we entered, his massive frame overflowing the chair. I wondered how long it would take you, Sherlock. The Countess is dead, I take it? Holmes flung hat and coat upon a settle. Poisoned by her own device, but the case is not closed. Someone watched her die, someone who still walks free. I need everything you have on Elena Moriarty since her supposed death in Naples. Mycroft sighed and touched a bell. A silent steward brought a thin dossier stamped with the Admiralty seal. Very little, he said, opening it. She vanished from the sanatorium at Capri in '92. The certificate of death was signed by a Dr. Werner, who curiously disappeared the same week. Since then, nothing official. Unofficial whispers placed her in Paris, then Vienna, always under the name Winter. She was seen at the chemical lectures of Professor Hochstadt, expert in rare poisons. 6 months ago she returned to England. That is all. Holmes scanned the pages rapidly. And Lord Arthur Harrowby. Mycroft's eyebrows rose. The nephew, a dissolute young man. Cards, actresses, the usual. Heavy debts at his club. Nothing to suggest criminal genius. Yet he inherited everything, and someone used him cruelly. Holmes handed his brother the white vellum diary we had taken from the Bloomsbury room. Mycroft read in silence, his heavy face growing graver with every page. "Good God," he murmured at last. The woman was a fiend, but this final entry from the third camellia for the widow tonight was written after Slater's death. If she was too ill to leave her room, who was to deliver it? Exactly. Holmes leaned forward. Mycroft, I need a list of every person who has entered or left Belgrave Square since yesterday noon. Constables, servants, tradesmen, everyone. Mycroft lifted an eyebrow. Already done. Lestrade telegraphed the duty rosters an hour ago. He slid a sheet across the table. Holmes's eyes raced down the columns. Suddenly he stabbed the page with a lean forefinger. Here, at 4:30 this afternoon, a flower seller. Female, tall, veiled, carrying a basket of white camellias. Gained entrance by claiming Lady Harrowby had ordered them for the funeral. Delivered the basket to the butler personally and left within 5 minutes. No one thought to detain her because of the veil and the snow. He sprang to his feet. That was no chance seller. That was our murderer, the real murderer, walking beneath the noses of a dozen constables. Mycroft's voice was quiet. Then you believe the Countess was herself a pawn? I believe she was the architect who never left her sick room. Someone else laid the frozen poison, climbed the yew tree, sent the telegrams, watched us find the body. Someone who inherited the Moriarty mind without the Moriarty conscience. He turned to me, his eyes burning. Watson, the third camellia, the one meant for Lady Harrowby, was delivered hours ago. If it carries the same frozen pellet as the Countess used upon herself. We were already at the door. The journey back to Belgrave Square was a nightmare. The cab wheels skidded helplessly. Twice we were forced to abandon it and struggle on foot through drifts to the knee. The great house loomed ahead at last, every window blazing. Lestrade met us in the hall, his face ashen. Too late, Mr. Holmes, Lady Harrowby is dead. Found not 10 minutes ago in the conservatory, same symptoms, same agony. The camellia was in her hand. Door bolted from within just like the first time. Holmes pushed past him without a word. The conservatory was exactly as I remembered it. The warm, heavy air, the scent of orchids, the tessellated floor. Lady Harrowby lay where her husband had lain, limbs contorted, lips blue, the white camellia crushed against her breast. But something was different. Holmes knelt, touched the petals, then the woman's wrist. He looked up, and for the first time in our long association, I saw something close to bewilderment in his face. She is warm, Watson. Warm in her pulse. Good God, she lives. He tore open her bodice, pressed an ear to her heart. Stethoscope, quickly. I had it out in an instant. The beat was rapid, thready, but undeniably there. Holmes snatched the camellia, crushed the heart between his fingers. A bead of clear liquid oozed out, prussic acid, frozen only minutes earlier. Artificial respiration, help me. We worked over her for a quarter of an hour, Holmes forcing air into her lungs while I massaged her heart. At last she gave a convulsive shudder and began to breathe on her own, shallowly but regularly. Lestrade stood gaping. But how? The dose was smaller, Holmes said, rising. Meant to kill slowly, perhaps to allow the murderer to watch from the garden. But we disturbed the timing. She lives, for now. Send for her physician and an ambulance sleigh to Charing Cross Hospital. He turned to the glass wall that faced the darkened garden. Snow lashed against the panes. And now, he said softly, we set the trap. The murderer believes the third camellia has done its work. He, or she, will come to confirm it. Lestrade, extinguish all lights but one. Watson, your revolver. We waited in the humid darkness, the only sound the faint breathing of the woman on the floor and the ceaseless whisper of the snow outside. An hour passed. 2. The cold began to creep in despite the pipes. Then faintly, the scrape of a latch. A panel in the glass wall, hidden among the creepers, swung inward. A figure stepped through, cloaked and hooded in white, a dark lantern in one hand. The beam played over the floor, found the motionless form of Lady Harrowby, lingered upon the crushed camellia. The figure gave a low, satisfied laugh, almost a sob, and moved forward. Holmes's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Good evening, Lord Arthur." The hood fell back. It was indeed the nephew, his face ghastly pale, eyes wide with terror and triumph. "You are too late, Mr. Holmes," he whispered. "The curse is fulfilled. 3 camellias, 3 deaths. The estate is mine, and no court in England will hang a man for a family legend." Holmes stepped into the circle of light, his pistol leveled. "Except that Lady Harrowby lives, and the real Countess Moriarty died by her own hand this afternoon, betrayed by the young man she believed was her disciple." Lord Arthur's face contorted into a mask of demonic hatred. "She was weak," he spat, "dying anyway. I gave her the grand design she craved, and when she became a danger, I let her destroy herself. The Moriarty genius was wasted on a woman. It required a man to perfect it." He laughed again, high, cracking. "But you cannot prove—" Holmes held up the coil of silk line, the grapnel, the burnt fragment of the Harrowby crest. "I can prove everything. You used the Countess as your screen, just as you used Slater, just as you intended to use the legend of the camellias. But genius, Lord Arthur, requires conscience as well as intellect. Without it, it becomes mere insanity." For a moment the young man stood swaying, the lantern trembling in his hand. Then, with a scream that was more animal than human, he hurled it straight at Holmes's head and sprang for the open panel. My revolver spoke once. Lord Arthur staggered, clutched his leg, and fell writhing among the orchids. As Lestrade and his men burst in with lanterns, Holmes knelt again beside Lady Harrowby. Her eyes fluttered open. "The camellia," she whispered, "is withered," Holmes answered gently, "and the winter is ending." Outside, the snow still fell, but softer now, as though the storm itself were weary of death. Chapter 8. The Second Death Lord. Arthur Harrowby lay on the tessellated floor of the conservatory, one hand clamped about his bleeding thigh, the other still clutching the dark lantern as though it were a talisman. The orchids around him trembled in the sudden draft from the open panel. Lestrade's constables swarmed in, their bullseyes throwing wild shadows across the glass roof. "Bind that wound, Watson," Holmes said quietly, "and see that he does not bleed to death before he reaches the dock. A trial will be more satisfying than a corpse." I knelt, cut away the fine cloth with my pocket knife, and applied a tourniquet above the wound. The bullet had shattered the femur. The young man was pale as the camellias that lay crushed about him, but his eyes still blazed with that terrible mixture of fear and defiance. "You will never make it stick," he hissed through clenched teeth. "Half the evidence was in Elena's rooms. She is dead. Her diary burned with her. The rest is legend and coincidence. I shall plead the curse." Holmes regarded him with cold contempt. "Legend does not leave footprints that end in mid-air, Lord Arthur. Nor does coincidence provide frozen prussic acid and silk fishing line. You have confessed in the presence of 5 police officers. Your career as a criminal Napoleon is over before it began." Lestrade, practical as ever, was already snapping handcuffs upon the prisoner's wrists. "Arthur Harrowby, I arrest you for the murders of Sir Reginald Harrowby, Felix Slater, and Countess Elena Moriarty, and for the attempted murder of Lady Clarissa Harrowby." "Anything you say?" Arthur laughed, a high, cracked sound that echoed unnaturally among the glass panes. "3 murders and 1 attempted," he mocked. "The camellias demanded 3. You have only 2 corpses and a dying woman. The curse is not yet satisfied." He twisted suddenly, staring past us into the darkness of the garden. "And the snow still falls," he whispered. "It falls impartially upon the just and the unjust." A strange chill passed through me, for at that moment the wind gusted hard against the conservatory, rattling the panes like bones, and the single camellia still lying upon Lady Harrowby's breast seemed to glow with an unearthly whiteness. They carried him away. Lady Harrowby, now breathing more steadily, was lifted onto a stretcher and borne off to the waiting ambulance sleigh. The great house emptied until only Holmes, Lestrade, and I remained among the silent palms. Lestrade rubbed his hands together nervously. "Well, Mr. Holmes, a clean conclusion, though I confess I never suspected the nephew. Thought him a mere wastrel. Wastrels may be murderers when fortune and a Moriarty mind are offered them," Holmes replied. He stood motionless, gazing at the spot where Lord Arthur had fallen. "Yet something is wrong, Watson. The man is a monster, but he is not a fool. Why confess so completely? Why that last theatrical speech about the snow falling impartially?" He bent suddenly and picked up the crushed camellia from the floor. A few petals clung to the blood upon the marble. "Observe," he said. "This is not the flower delivered this afternoon. The stem is freshly broken within the hour, and there is no trace of the frozen pellet. Lord Arthur brought this with him." Lestrade snorted. "Wanted a souvenir, perhaps. Or a signature." Holmes's voice was very quiet. "He spoke of 3 corpses, we have only 2. And the Countess, whatever her guilt, was poisoned by her own device, hardly murder in the eyes of the law. Lord Arthur knows that, yet he spoke as though the 3rd death had already occurred." He turned on his heel. "Come." We returned to the house. There is one place we have not yet searched thoroughly. We found it in the attic, a narrow servant's room under the eaves, locked from the inside, the key still in the lock. The air was bitter cold. Snow had sifted through a cracked skylight and lay in a small mound upon the bare boards. Upon a truckle bed lay the body of Mrs. Macready, the Scottish housekeeper. She had been dead some hours. Her face was contorted in the familiar rictus, lips blue, eyes protruding. In her rigid fingers was clenched a white camellia, its heart stained crimson. A tumbler beside the bed still held a finger's breadth of laudanum, her nightly dose for neuralgia. The faint, unmistakable scent of bitter almonds rose from the glass. Holmes examined the room with minute care. The door had been locked from within, the key turned and left in the lock. The skylight was too small for any human to pass, and the snow upon the roof above was undisturbed. The single window was fastened tight. "Another locked room," Lestrade said helplessly. "But how—" Holmes pointed to a tiny hole bored through the panel of the door, no larger than a 6pence, hidden beneath the knob. An old smuggler's trick, a flexible tube, India rubber perhaps, passed through the hole, the vapor of prussic acid blown in from the keyhole side. The tube withdrawn, the hole stopped with putty and painted over. Mrs. Macready drank her laudanum, fell asleep, and never woke. The camellia was pushed under the door afterwards. Note the crushed stem. He opened the woman's clenched fist with difficulty. Beneath the camellia lay a crumpled note in Lord Arthur's handwriting. "You knew too much about the lady visitor. The 3rd camellia is for you. The curse must be complete. Lestrade stared at the corpse, then at Holmes. But Harrowby was under our eyes all evening. We brought him from the drawing room not an hour ago. Exactly. Holmes's voice was grim. He prepared this room earlier, perhaps yesterday, when he knew we were closing in. The tube, the poison, the note, all placed in readiness. He counted on us finding the Countess dead, on Lady Harrowby apparently dying, and on this poor woman completing the triad. 3 deaths by the white camellia, perfect misdirection. The locked door, the undisturbed snow, another impossible crime to baffle us while he posed as the bereaved heir. He looked down at the housekeeper's rigid features. She was loyal to the old family. Perhaps she guessed about the veiled visitor. Perhaps she threatened to speak. In any case, she paid the price. Lestrade removed his hat respectfully. 4 murders, then, he said heavily. Sir Reginald, Slater, the Countess indirectly, and now this poor soul. Holmes shook his head. 3 direct, 1 indirect, and 1 attempted. But the tally is complete. The camellias have had their fill. He stood a long moment in silence, then turned abruptly. Come, Watson, the storm lessens. By morning the thaw will set in, and London will wash its streets clean of this nightmare. As we descended the narrow attic stair, the wind gave one last rattling moan about the eaves, and somewhere in the great house a clock struck 4. I glanced back once. The white camellia upon the dead woman's breast seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, like a malignant eye watching us depart. Outside, the snow had indeed begun to slacken. Great flakes no longer lashed the windows. Instead, they drifted down softly, gently, as though the storm itself were weary and repentant. By dawn, the gutters would run, the rooftops steam, and the white shroud that had covered so many sins would melt away into the common mud of the city. But in the locked attic room, Mrs. Macready would lie in her cold bed until the coroner came, and the 3rd camellia, now truly the last, would wither beside her, its curse fulfilled at last. Chapter 9. The Locked Room in Bloomsbury. The thaw began at dawn. A soft, reluctant warmth crept into the city, and the snow that had been our enemy for a week turned traitor overnight. Eaves dripped like weeping women. Gutters ran in muddy torrents. The great white silence of London dissolved into slush and the steady drip, drip, drip of mortality. Holmes and I returned to Grafton Street at 10 o'clock. The house opposite number 27, the one whose area steps had borne the mysterious descending footprints and the pressed camellia, stood blind and innocent in the pale February sun. A brass plate read, Dr. L. Werner, physician and accoucheur. The name struck a chord. I remembered Mycroft's dossier mentioning a Dr. Werner who had vanished from Capri the same week Elena Moriarty supposedly died. Holmes's knock was answered by a frightened maid. The doctor, she stammered, had left for the continent the previous evening. His patients had been transferred, his rooms closed. She had orders to admit no one. Holmes brushed past her as though she were a curtain. Official police business, he said crisply, and produced Lestrade's card with the dexterity of a conjurer. The consulting room was stripped bare, shelves empty, desk cleared, only a faint smell of carbolic and the ghost of cigar smoke lingering. In the grate lay gray ash and 1 half-burned sheet. Holmes rescued it with tongs. It was a railway timetable, Brussels to Ostend, circled in red. Upstairs, the living quarters told a different story. Drawers had been emptied in frantic haste. A woman's glove, white kid, left hand, lay forgotten beneath the bed. In the wardrobe hung a single garment, a white fur-lined cloak still damp from the storm. Holmes lifted it to the light. A dark stain marred the hem. Dried blood. Mrs. Macready's, he said quietly. Type matches the attic. Lord Arthur wore this when he killed her, then returned it here for his accomplice to dispose of. He moved to the window that overlooked the street. From this angle, the front of number 27 was perfectly visible. Here the watcher stood, he murmured. Hour after hour through the blizzard, noting every visitor to the Countess's door. When we arrived yesterday, he, or she, knew the game was up. The descending footprints were made in the last fall of snow. By morning the steps were clear again, the camellia melted away with the rest. He opened a small wall safe concealed behind a print of Vesuvius. Inside lay a single object, a glass phial, stoppered, half full of colorless liquid labeled in a neat hand acid, hydrocyanic. Purus. Holmes held it to the light, then slipped it into his pocket. Enough to kill a regiment, the final reserve. Downstairs the maid was weeping. Dr. Werner, he was always kind. Paid me double to say nothing about late visitors. There was a lady, tall, veiled, came often, and a gentleman with fair hair. They argued terribly 2 nights ago, shouting about money, about finishing the work. Then yesterday the doctor packed everything, said he'd be arrested if he stayed. Holmes thanked her gravely and pressed a sovereign into her hand. We stepped back into the street. The sun was stronger now. Water ran in rivulets from every roof. Across the way, number 27 looked smaller, almost pitiful, its tragedy already washing away. "Come, Watson," Holmes said. "One last call." Scotland Yard. Lestrade met us in his office, looking 10 years older. "Lord Arthur attempted suicide in his cell at 3 this morning," he said without preamble. "Smashed the water carafe, tried to open his wrist with a shard. He's alive, barely. Under heavy guard at Charing Cross Hospital, same ward as Lady Harrowby, ironically. Raving about white flowers and snow that never melts." He pushed a folded sheet across the desk. "Left this, addressed to you." The writing was shaky, the ink blotted with what might have been tears or prison water. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, you were right. Genius without conscience is madness. I thought I could wear the Moriarty mantle. I thought 3 deaths would crown me their equal. But the camellias lied. There were 4. Ask Mrs. Macready. Ask the child that will never be born. The house in Bloomsbury holds the rest. The snow is melting, and I am melting with it." A.H.I. looked at Holmes in horror. The child. He was already moving, back to Grafton Street. This time we forced the cellar door beneath the area steps, the door those mysterious footprints had descended toward. A flight of stone stairs led down into darkness. Holmes's lantern revealed a disused scullery, a copper, and in the corner a small iron bed. Upon it lay the body of a woman, young, fair-haired, perhaps 25. She had been dead some days. Her face was peaceful in repose, but the unmistakable signs were there. The slight swelling beneath the apron, the pallor of exsanguination. A single white camellia had been placed between her folded hands. Upon a rickety table stood an empty laudanum bottle and a note in Lord Arthur's hand. "My dearest girl, forgive me. You were to have been Lady Harrowby when the estate was mine. But you learned too much. About Elena, about the poison, about the child. I could not risk you speaking even to save you. The 5th camellia is for you. Sleep sweetly until the snow returns." Holmes stood a long while in silence. "Lord Arthur's mistress," he said at last. "A housemaid dismissed from Belgrave Square last autumn. Pregnant. Desperate. He kept her here. Promised marriage once the murders were complete. When she threatened to go to the police, he silenced her the only way he knew. Another locked room. The cellar door bolted from the inside, the key thrown down the coal hole after he left by the area steps. He lifted the camellia gently as though it might bruise. 5 white camellias. 5 deaths. Sir Reginald, Slater, the Countess, Mrs. Macready, and this poor girl. The curse was never supernatural. It was simply human wickedness given a poet's name. Upstairs the maid was still weeping. Outside the thaw quickened. Soot-streaked water poured from the gutters, carrying the last innocent snow down into the drains. We left the house in silence. Somewhere a church bell tolled the hour. The streets steamed in the pale sun, and London, vast, grimy, indomitable, began to forget the great white death that had lain upon it for 7 days and 7 nights. Only the camellias remembered. And they were already beginning to rot. Chapter 10. The Final Deduction. The thaw came in earnest on the 26th of January. By evening, the streets of London were rivers of slush, the air soft and dripping, and the gas lamps shone upon wet pavements instead of upon a world of frozen crystal. It seemed impossible that only a week earlier death had walked abroad in spotless white. We sat once more in our familiar sitting room at 221B. The fire crackled cheerfully, a kettle sang upon the hob. The bitter scent of Holmes's shag mingled with the comfortable aroma of Mrs. Hudson's coffee. Outside, the city steamed and smoked like a great animal shaking itself awake after a long, malignant sleep. I had spent the day at Charing Cross Hospital. Lady Harrowby would live, scarred, shaken, but alive. Lord Arthur Harrowby, heavily bandaged and under constant guard, had lapsed into a feverish silence, broken only by occasional mutterings about snow that would not melt. The inquest upon the Bloomsbury cellar victim, her name, we learned, was Rose Dempsey, had been adjourned. The coroner's jury returned verdicts of murder by person or persons unknown in 4 cases, willful murder by Lord Arthur in the 5th. The press, scenting an aristocratic scandal flavored with exotic poison and family curses, gorged itself for days. Holmes had refused all interviews. He sat now in his mouse-colored dressing gown, his violin across his knee, drawing from it a gentle, melancholy air, something of Mendelssohn's, I believe, that seemed to weave together sorrow, relief, and the faint, lingering chill of the snow that was no more. I laid down the evening paper and could contain myself no longer. "Well, Holmes," I said, "it is over. One of the blackest affairs we have ever handled, yet in some ways the most brilliant. I confess that for a time even I believed in the curse of the white camellia." He smiled faintly, the firelight flickering upon his keen profile. "Belief, my dear Watson, is the enemy of truth. There was never any curse. Only a particularly ruthless young man who discovered that an old family legend made the perfect cloak for murder. Lord Arthur Harrowby possessed just enough imagination to be deadly and just enough cowardice to hide behind a woman's genius." He laid the violin aside and began filling his pipe from the Persian slipper. "Let us, for the sake of clarity, reconstruct the entire chain one final time. It is a study in the banality of evil when stripped of its theatrical trappings." He ticked the points off upon his fingers, as was his habit. First, Sir Reginald faced ruin. The new will left everything to Lord Arthur. Motive established. Second, Lord Arthur, already deep in debt, encounters Countess Elena Moriarty, dying, consumed by hatred for the man who had once seduced and abandoned her, and for the brother I cast down at Reichenbach. She offers the perfect method: prussic acid frozen into blocks, vaporized upon hot pipes, death staged as the fulfillment of an ancient family curse. The white camellia becomes signature and terror weapon in one. Third, Lord Arthur, intoxicated by the grandeur of the scheme, agrees. He provides access to the house, the keys, the intimate knowledge of habits. The Countess, too ill to act herself, supplies the poison, the diary, the legend. Slater discovers the plot and attempts blackmail. He is eliminated. Mrs. Macready grows suspicious. She is silenced. Rose Dempsey, the pregnant mistress, threatens exposure. She is poisoned in the cellar and hidden. Fourth, when we close in, Lord Arthur accelerates the endgame. He allows the Countess to take her own life with the frozen pellet, believing her death will seal the illusion of a lone madwoman. He stages the attack upon Lady Harrowby, trusting we will arrive too late. Finally, he appears in the conservatory cloaked in white, ready to confirm the third death and inherit everything. But we arrived in time. The mask slipped. The curse dissolved into commonplace murder. I stirred the fire thoughtfully. And the footprints that ended in midair, the locked attic, the hidden panel in the conservatory. Child's play to a man who had the run of the house since boyhood. The silk line and grapnel for Slater's death. The India rubber tube through the attic door for Mrs. Macready. The secret panel, known to generations of Harrowby children for smuggling sweets past nannies. Lord Arthur simply used the toys of childhood for adult evil. Holmes rose and went to the window. The drizzle had begun. London's grime was washing itself clean. "There is perhaps a moral," he said quietly. "Genius without conscience is not grandeur, it is merely disease." The professor understood limits. His sister understood vengeance. Lord Arthur understood neither. He thought to make himself a criminal emperor with 5 camellias and a dying woman's hatred. Instead, he became merely another squalid poisoner who will hang at Newgate. He turned back to the room, his eyes very bright. And yet, I cannot quite banish pity. Somewhere inside that monster was a clever boy who loved secrets and hidden passages. Had he chosen medicine, or the bar, or even the stage, he might have been extraordinary. Instead, he chose the snow, and the snow betrayed him. I refilled our cups in silence. The kettle had ceased its song. The fire settled into comfortable embers. "Will Lady Harrowby ever recover?" I asked at last. "From the poison, yes. From the knowledge that her husband's nephew murdered him for an inheritance, and that she herself was to have been the third victim. No. Some wounds do not heal, Watson. They merely cease to bleed." He took up his violin again and began to play, softly, almost tenderly. A simple Scottish air. I recognized it after a moment. The flowers of the forest. Outside, the rain whispered against the panes, washing away the last traces of the great snow. Somewhere in the city, 5 camellias withered in police evidence boxes, their brief and deadly blooming over. The curse, if curse it had ever been, was broken, melted, gone. Holmes played on, the bow drawing from the strings a lament as gentle as the thaw itself. And for the first time in many days I felt the warmth of the fire reach my bones and knew that winter, for all its terrors, must always yield at last to spring. In the street below, a coster's barrow splashed through the puddles and a boy's voice rose clear and cheerful, selling early violets. The white camellias were dead. London lived,